morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I have a really good friend that all through our lives, kind of growing up since we were teenagers, every once in a while, even though we know it's a trick question, we'll ask one another, are you happy? It's kind of an annoying question sometimes. Are you happy? Because for me, when I'm asked that question, I kind of go into my conditioning to think that whether you're happy or not is dependent upon how pleasant your life is on any given time. So I start adding up the pros versus cons, the pleasant things, the unpleasant thing, and for me, just one unpleasant thing, one negative, can cause me to have to resist answering that question, am I happy? And if it is true that what I want in my life is to be happy, it's kind of like a punch in the gut. Because I realize within my own consciousness, within my own mind, I'm at some level saying no to my own being happy. There's a resistance there, and it always makes me wonder what it's really about. Now, I know when my friend and I ask each other this question, we're not just asking, is your life pleasant? We're saying, are you being who you really want to be? Or to put it in a more cynical way, are you sure you're not screwing everything up? And that is what we really do mean when we ask each other that question, that I have to listen more deeply to myself to understand that happiness isn't a state of affairs or the result of externals, a scorecard in life. If it is, then ask me when it's all done, and I can tell you whether happiness won out or not. But what it is a statement about who I am in relationship with the Spirit to live within me. Happiness is the very byproduct of my relationship with the Spirit for life within me. When I am living in accordance with that life, when I am true to it, when I allow it to express itself through me, happiness is. And I feel like I'm my best self. So, sparing that I annoy anyone in the room, I have to ask the question, are you happy? How many people are you happy? Do you need some time to think about it? Anyone unhappy? Yes, someone said unhappy. I think that's cool, though, because you're mindful of that. What I would argue, spare, of course, the understanding that there are incredibly difficult experiences that so many have to go through that can make happiness seem like a distant memory or the last thing on one's mind. I would still argue that the number one thing that keeps one from happiness is this word resistance. That if you're unhappy, I would invite you to consider that the number one thing keeping you from happiness is your own resistance to saying yes, to just allowing yourself to step into that. See, I often think, believe it or not, that it's the good of life that we are more apt to deny than it is the negative or difficult in life. There's a comment that was shared with a psychologist by the name of Gerald May that I've always found interesting. He says, a friend of mine once abruptly announced, I never do anything which will make me feel too good, because when I feel very, very good, I start to marvel at the wonder of being alive. And then I become frightened. Partly it's because the more I feel the beauty of being here on this earth, the more I realize how fragile life is, how easily it can stop. And partly it's because I just don't know what to do with it all. I know I can spoil it if I try to touch it, or even if I think about it, but it's almost intolerable just to let it be. No, I'm really much more comfortable when I'm not too close to the wonder of life. When I've got problems or distractions or something to struggle with, I feel much better because at least I know who I am and what I need to do. Common sense, we would say, teaches us that we avoid being upset, that we avoid the negative, that we avoid the frustrating. But I think if we really think about it, that's not the truth of the matter. The common sense is wrong. In my own experience, I find that to be true. As much as I don't enjoy being frustrated, I seem to jump at the opportunity. When someone cuts me off or says something that annoys me, I'm very quick to get upset. I fit very comfortably for some reason in getting angry from time to time. It's the loving part that's hard. It's the receiving or giving of a compliment where I start to resist. It's the doing something that I love to do for myself or someone that I care about that sometimes brings about a second thought. And I'm a pretty loving and caring dude, and I struggle with it. I don't know, does this resonate with you? Do you find that to be true? And I think that the reason is the vulnerability that it causes, the intimacy that it brings about. That sometimes there's that fear of the wonder of life, of the transformations that might occur, of the intimacy that might occur, that there's a resistance to the happiness. There's a resistance to the Spirit. Overcoming this resistance isn't easy, but when we do, happiness in my mind can become easier and easier. Our goal should not to be some fake person who's pretending to be happy all the time, because we know that's not happy, it's just really dull and boring. The goal is to focus and commit ourselves to a daily practice that honors our spirit to live within us, so that we recognize its sacredness in all that we do. I love a simple quote from the Buddhist thinker Charlotte Joko Beck, who said, "Who knows how we should be? We simply do our best over and over and over." I wanted to share a couple different stories about overcoming resistance this morning. The first comes from the wizarding world of Harry Potter. So we would say, us muggles, and muggles, you have to know this for the story, are us full-blooded humans, no wizard blood in you. But for us muggles, we'd say that J.K. Rowling wrote a story called The Wizard and the Hopping Pot. But if we really want to embrace the story, we have to understand that in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, this is like the Rumpelstiltskin. It's their old legend that they follow for life. And sometimes people ask, "Josh, where do you get these inventive ideas for sermons?" And where I got this story from is from a wonderful young man by the name of Gavin McAllister, who's here, who I have to give him some sort of credit for sharing the story, and so he's going to help me tell the story. So I'm going to invite him up. Come on up here, Gavin. And so this story again is called The Wizard and the Hopping Pot.
Hello and good morning. There was once a kindly old wizard who used his magic generously and wisely for the benefit of his neighbors. Rather than reveal the true source of his power, he pretended that his potions, charms, and antidotes sprang ready-made from a little cauldron he called his lucky cooking pot. From miles around, people came to him with their troubles, and the wizard was pleased to give his pot a stir and put things right.
Thank you. When the wizard grew, to be very old and passed away, he left the cooking pot to his son. Now, the thing to understand about the wizard's son is he didn't have the same kind disposition as his father. He didn't like this idea of helping all the neighbors, especially if they were muggles. So when he realized that his inheritance wasn't gold, but was indeed this cooking pot, he wasn't really happy. He shut it in the basement and he said, "I'll just use it as a garbage can."
That very night, a pleasant woman knocked on the front door. "My granddaughter is afflicted by a crop of warts, sir," she told him. "Your father used to mix a special pelisse in that old cooking pot." "Be gone," cried the son. "What care have I for your brat's warts?" And he slammed the door in the old woman's face.
How rude.
Yeah.
Just then the wizard heard a large and loud commotion coming from the basement. So he went down and he opened the door and he saw that the cooking pot had grown a brass foot and was now hopping up and down, boiling. And what was it boiling? The wizard looked inside and it was filled with warts. He ran up to his room because his magic couldn't calm the pot at all. He locked the door, but still the pot continued to hop outside. The wizard didn't sleep at all that night. When he woke up, there were more bangs on the door. An old man who wanted help healing a donkey. A mother who wanted help curing her sick child.
Though no more villagers came to seek help at the wizard's cottage for the rest of the week, The pot took them informed of their many ills. Within a few days, it was not only braying and groaning and slipping and hopping and sprouting warts, it was also choking and retching, crying like a baby, whining like a dog, spewing out bad cheese and sour milk, and a clod of hungry slugs.
Yeah. I share with the audience, I think that's how me and Jason felt when the Broncos lost a few years ago. So at that point, the wizard just couldn't take it anymore. So he started running down the street with the pot hopping after him, saying, "Bring me all of your ills," curing each and every one who came forward down the street. And finally, what happened? The pot began to calm down.
Together, they set off back to the wizard's house. The pot's footsteps muffled at last, but from that day forward, the wizard helped the villagers, like his father before him, lest the pot begin to hop once more.
And so it is. So let's hear it for Gavin. He might get used to this minister thing and just want to stay up there for a while. We're all going to stay up there. So you don't, in my mind, have to be Joseph Campbell to figure out the symbolism and the metaphors in the story. To me, the lucky cooking pot is very symbolic of our conscience. But in this story, it doesn't just take the shape of that part of us that knows right from wrong, but also that part of us, if we were to truly utilize its magic, would know how to heal ourselves, would know how to heal those around us, would know what it means to do the most good for ourselves, that knows what it would mean to do the most good around us. And for me, the real great kind of really deep start, if I'm allowed to take Harry Potter really deep, Michael gives me permission there, is that we all have that experience of the warts coming up inside of us, of feeling and experiencing the slugs or the gross things. And it's so important to understand that those aren't really who we are. They're the reflection of the externals around us that we refuse to confront, that we are unwilling to heal, where we are unwilling to be ourselves. We are faced with these difficult aspects of ourselves. A couple weeks ago, we talked about this idea that our self-chatter perhaps is but a defense at times from how we really feel. And it's sometimes not until we're able to really listen and acknowledge the warts and the things coming up that we can sift past them back to that part of ourselves that wants to heal ourselves again, that wants to love ourselves again, that wants to love those around us again. The other story about resistance I wanted to share with you is the story of Clarence Jones, who was a lawyer and speechwriter for Martin Luther King. And he tells the very simple story of what got him mixed up, you might say, at the time in the civil rights movement. He was a young man, and he married his wife, and he got his law degree, and he bought a nice house in California. So things were going really great. He was building his practice, and he got a call from this gentleman named Martin Luther King, who wasn't all that well known at the time, that he wanted to come and visit him. And so Clarence welcomed Martin Luther King into his home, and Martin Luther King sat him down and he said, "I'm doing some work in Alabama, and what I want more than anything else is young, strong black lawyers to come and help me with this fight that we're engaged in." And Clarence said what probably most folks living in California would say if invited to come to move to Alabama. He said, no thank you to Mr. King. Mr. King understood, and he thanked him, and he met his wife, and he left. And Clarence's wife was pretty angry with him for not hearing Mr. King out more. A couple hours later, a phone call came in. It was Martin Luther King's secretary saying, "It was very nice to meet both of you today. The minister forgot to invite you to a sermon tomorrow morning at a local church. Would you please come?" And the wife hung up the phone and she said, "You may not be moving to Alabama, but you're going to go to the sermon tomorrow morning." So they went to the sermon at a nearby church. 2 seats right in the front row. Martin Luther King gets up and he says, "The text of today's sermon is the role of the Negro professional to aid our less fortunate brothers and sisters who are struggling for freedom in the South." So Jones would later share, he would later on write the draft that would become the I Have a Dream speech. He shared that he'd never quite experienced God speak through someone in that way, presence so awe-striking as King's was that day, and yet the resonance in his own heart. Walking out with all the congregants that day, he approached Dr. King and he said, "When would you like me to move to Montgomery, Alabama?" But can you imagine if he would have said no? The warts, the slugs, all those things that come up, which can happen for us, because so often we think happiness looks a certain way, but life calls us in another direction, and that's why it's so important to listen to our hearts. I think, again, happiness can be easy when we overcome the resistance. But overcoming the resistance isn't easy. It takes a consistent practice, a consistent focus, just like a meditation practice or a prayer practice. Focusing on what makes us happy is something that we should spend time on every day, be it through a gratitude journal, through making sure we're working for our own good in business decisions versus against ourselves, for making sure we spend a certain amount of time doing what we love and care most about as opposed to that which we would rather not be doing. It takes consistent and dedicated practice. Our book for the month has been 10% Happier by Dan Harris, who's an anchor for Nightline. And the 10% Happier I really like, as opposed to approaching meditation as a way to get enlightenment. He talks about how meditation's helped him be 10% happier, that it's helped him a little bit in each and every area of his life. But he shares humorously going to a 5-day meditation retreat and it being one of the most horrific experiences of his life, having to learn to focus those few days on listening to himself, on meditating, on breaking some of those general traits that he has. He says, "Almost immediately, I realized that sitting on cushions is a terrible idea. I am assailed by back and neck pain. The circulation to my feet feels like it's dangerously choked off. I try to focus on my breathing, but I can't keep a volley of more than 1 or 2 breaths. In, out, in. Holy crap. I think my feet are going to snap off at the ankle. In. It feels like a dinosaur has my ribcage in its mouth. Out. I'm hungry. In. It's really quiet in here. Out. I wonder if anyone else is freaking out right now." This can be what it's like to approach that spirit of life within ourselves, because again, that resistance is that self-chatter that doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be listened to so that we can cut through it like a knife to get to how we really feel, how we really think. What do I really believe? It's then that we can feel ourselves soaring again, and that's what happens a few days for Mr. Harris. It's like I'd spent the past 5 days being dragged by my head behind a motor boat, and now, all of a sudden, I'm up on water skis. This is an experience of my own mind I've never had before, a front row seat to watch the machinery of consciousness. It's thrilling, but it also produces some very practical insights. I get a real sense of how a few slippery little thoughts I might have in, say, the morning before I go to work, or maybe after a quarrel with my wife, or a story I read in the paper, or an imagined dialogue with my boss, how these thoughts can weasel their way into the stream of my mind and pull in unseen eddies from which they hector and haunt me throughout the day. So overcoming the resistance to being well, to being happy, isn't easy. It takes consistent practice every day. But if we can learn to listen to the deepest part of ourselves, I believe, although happiness may be unique for all of us, that wellspring and what is contained within it is the same for all of us. How we utilize it is where our uniqueness comes in. One of the most difficult things in my life for being happy is when I've attached it to externals. In particular, when I've narrowed my vision so much that I've said happiness or good must come from this particular source. It must come from this person. It must come from this job. It must come from this circumstance. And I know when I've done that within myself, I've resisted happiness in all those different areas. Sometimes depending on sources that can't even tie their own shoes, right? I mean, we do that from time to time on things that will never be able to help provide us with what we're looking for. Part of committing ourselves to being happy, to overcome the resistance, is to open ourselves up to not only what the universe could demonstrate for us in terms of what will make us happy, but to really serve ourselves, to make ourselves happy. What would make me happy? I love something the thinker Sherry Huber said in her relationship book, Be the Person You Want to Find. She says, describe the steps you would take, the gifts you would buy, the generosity you would bestow, the kindness you would offer, the enthusiasm you would have, the attention you would give, and anything else that appeals to you. If you were to begin giving yourself the things you want someone else to give you. Happiness, in order to receive it from anywhere around us, is something we have to open ourselves up to first. And that's why I love Huber's thought here. Unless we are willing to give it to ourselves, to receive it, we can't receive it from any external source around us. We must continue to open ourselves, to deepen ourselves. That work of reaching and being prepared for intimacy and vulnerability with life around us that can transform us, enlighten us, and inspire us. It takes that deepening commitment to realize that happiness doesn't have to take work, it just takes being yourself. For those of us who've lost ourselves in seas of thoughts, of self-pity, of self-criticism, ourselves may seem like a missing person on the side of the milk carton. But when we can begin to cultivate who we are again, slowly, do it by yourself, we can begin to feel that life again. It becomes to come through us in a way that we can trust, in a way that we can hear, and it begins to shine and rub off on everything around us as well. So just simply taking a prayerful moment in closing, I just invite us to become aware of anywhere where we may be keeping ourselves from a spirit of life, from a greater quality of being, from the wonder of spirit, knowing that nothing can truly keep us from our spirit, for it is more who we are than anything else. May we reunite ourselves by letting any identity attached to a thought of self-criticism, self-want, self-insufficiency, just simply letting it go to resume that identity and spirit again, knowing that it has a flow and a momentum and a trajectory that brings us eternally deeper into who we are and what life really is. We give thanks for it, and so it is. So, thanks again.